Hi, I welcome you to another session of a Daniel Hayford's lecture on the part 3 of the theme, an overview of the environment, ecological systems, and the field of ecology as we know it today. Ladies and gentlemen, by now you recall the fact that a biological community, or simply a community, refers to a diverse group of living organisms which live and interact in a common setting or location. You also recognize the fact that a forest, which is inhabited by various species of animals, various species of plants, as well as various species of soil bacteria and fungi, for example, forms a biological community. Again, it is possible that you acknowledge the fact that there are various factors which contribute to a biological community, and that those factors include: 1, diversity or the number of species; 2, abundance or the number of individuals in each species; and 3, the interactions which occurs among the diverse species. You also know that biological interactions include competition, parasitism, predation, commensalism, and mutualism. Great. Did you know the biological communities change over time? And when they change, the phenomenon is referred to as ecological succession. Ladies and gentlemen, to begin with our exploration of ecological succession, take note of the fact that disturbance is a key feature of most biological communities, and that it is ecological disturbance which truly necessitates ecological succession. That is, a transition in species composition of a community or a series of replacements in a community. Ecological disturbance truly necessitates ecological succession. That is, a transition in species composition of a community or a series of replacements in a community. There are generally 2 types of ecological successions, namely primary and secondary succession. Primary succession occurs when a new patch of land is created or exposed for the first time. Or primary succession occurs where there is no soil present, and that it refers to the gradual colonization of barren rocks. Examples of the ways in which primary succession can occur include: 1, when lava cools down and creates new rocks; and 2, when a glacier retreats in such a way that it exposes rocks without any soil. This implies that during primary succession, the living organisms involved must start from the scratch. To begin with, lichens might attach themselves to rock surfaces, and a few small plant species which have the capacity to survive and thrive without much soil might appear on those rocks. These plant species are called pioneer species. Slowly, the decomposition of those plant species contribute to soil formation, and more and larger plant species start to take over the location. In due course, a considerable amount of soil gets formed at the location and enough nutrients become available to the extent that a climax community, including a forest, is established at the area. If the location in question is disturbed after this point or stage, secondary succession takes place in that area. Secondary succession occurs where soil is present and some plant species can begin to grow. That is, secondary succession occurs after a disturbance has ruined a community but left the soil intact. It can be said to take place when a climax community or intermediate kind of community is impacted considerably by a disturbance. It restarts the cycle of succession, albeit not back to the beginning as soil and nutrients are still there. In Ghana, for example, there has been several occasions when forest fire occurred in some communities or landscapes. After those fires killed all the mature trees in those communities or landscapes, green grasses grew, followed by shrubs and various tree species, until finally communities which are similar to those which existed before the fire outbreak were established again in those settings. A climax community is said to be the endpoint of ecological succession within the context of a given climate and geography. In some regions around the world, such a climax community might be a hardwood forest with oaks and hickories as the dominant tree species. In some regions around the world, a climax community might be a hardwood forest with oaks and hickories as the dominant tree species. Indeed, it has been observed that such a community remains in a landscape until a disturbance happens. Nevertheless, in various ecosystems, ecological disturbance takes place often, and to the extent that a matrix of community types may be constantly present on the landscape. In various ecosystems, ecological disturbance takes place often, and to the extent that a matrix of community types may be constantly present on the landscape. This is the situation of those places which are prone to wildfires. In some of such places, mature forests may occur close to grassy meadows with fewer scattered trees. Constant ecological disturbance and fluctuation, as well as availability of abiotic factors such as water and nutrients over some decades, then makes it possible for various plant and animal communities to thrive within a given climatic and geographic niche, not just those which are adapted to the lack of ecological disturbance observed in climax communities. Studies have shown that ecological succession can take place in various contexts and over various time spans around the biosphere. In places such as the Iceland and Hawaii, for example, primary succession happens on lava flows where new land has been established. In Canada's Athabasca's dunes, a primary succession takes place whenever new sand is dumped along a lake shore. And in the Andes, it takes place when glaciers retreat. In various regions around the world, the secondary type of ecological succession takes place in places where wildfires have ruined coniferous forest lands or where previous agricultural land is returning to scrub land or meadow. Ladies and gentlemen, do you know there are certain things which these examples of ecological successions have in common? And that is, the climax community is not the initial one on the landscape following the commencement of the succession. Instead, intermediate communities are established in the site at times for many years, creating ideal conditions for the next communities. Ladies and gentlemen, recall the fact that invasive species can devastate communities and that they are species which have been introduced to non-native habitats by human beings and have established themselves to a great extent at the expense of native communities. Lack of natural enemies or predators characteristically allow rapid population growth of invasive species. Did you know ecosystem ecology lays great emphasis on energy flow and chemical recycling? An ecosystem includes a community and the abiotic factors with which it interacts. That is, it refers to community and interactions of living and non-living things in an area. In each ecosystem, there are autotrophs which produce their own food in the form of organic substances using energy, especially from sunlight, and inorganic compounds or chemical elements. So, autotrophs are producers. In each ecosystem, there are also heterotrophs. These living organisms are unable to produce their own food. They use diverse methods to be able to make use of food produced by autotrophs. Heterotrophs include herbivores or primary consumers, carnivores which are classified as secondary and tertiary consumers, as well as detritivores and decomposers. Heterotrophs and autotrophs are biotic factors, but resources such as nutrients and conditions like temperature, light, relative humidity, and rainfall, as well as type of soil, are abiotic factors. Did you know it is primary production that sets the energy budget for ecosystems? Every ecosystem is characterized by energy flow and chemical recycling. Energy flows because as food passes from one population of living organisms to the next, each population makes energy conversions which result in a loss of unusable energy. Chemicals cycle because they pass from one population to the next until decomposers return them once more to the producers. Ladies and gentlemen, by now you should effortlessly acknowledge the fact that in a biological community, except for autotrophic organisms, most living things depend on other living things for food. As you are aware, this kind of interdependence on other living organisms can be represented by two kinds of food models. One of such models is a food web, and the other is food chain. In the case of a food web, for example, each living organism involved occupies a particular place on the chain called the trophic level. In other words, you remember the fact that ecosystems have food webs in which the diverse living things are connected by trophic relationships. You remember that there are, for example, grazing and detrital food webs. Note also that in a detrital food web, food chains start with detritus, and in a grazing food web, the chains begins with a producer. You are aware that the term food chain refers to the order of events in an ecological system where one living thing chooses to eat another living thing, and later that living thing is also eaten by another living thing, and so on and so forth. And that it is the flow of nutrients and energy from one living thing to another at different trophic levels which creates a food chain. In other words, you know that food chain refers to the sequence of events. I beg your pardon. In other words, you know that food chain refers to the sequence of transfers of matter and energy in the form of food from one living organism to another. And that various food chains do interweave or intertwine locally into a food web due to the fact that most living things can consume more than one type of animal, fungi, or plants, etc. You also know that a food web refers to a complex network of interconnecting and overlapping food chains, indicating feeding relationships within a biotic community. Or simply, a food web comprises of all the food chains in a single ecological system. Indeed, each living thing, including a human, in an ecosystem is a component of multiple food chains. And each food chain is one probable path of energy and nutrients through the ecosystem. And that all of the interconnected and overlapping food chains in an ecosystem form a food web. Ladies and gentlemen, you also remember the fact that living organisms in food webs are grouped into categories called trophic levels. These levels could be divided into 1. Producers, which occupy the first trophic level; 2. Consumers, which occupy the intermediate levels; and 3. Decomposers, which occupy the last trophic level. The ecological pyramids are graphic representations of the number of living things or living organisms, biomass, or energy content of trophic levels. Indeed, it is energy supply which limits the length of food chains. This is the reason why a pyramid of production is used to show the flow of energy from producers through primary consumers to higher trophic levels. Only about 10% of the energy stored at each trophic level is available to the next trophic level. That is, there is about 90% loss of energy at each trophic level. This you can refer to as the 10% rule. A pyramid of production also explains the ecological cost of meat. It has been observed that a field of corn, for example, can support many human beings who are vegetarians than meat eaters. Why does demand for meat also tend to drive up prices of fruits and vegetables, as well as grains such as wheat, corn or maize, and rice? The answer is simple. That is, the potential supply of various plant species for direct consumption as food for human beings is reduced to a considerable extent by the use of farm land to grow feed for goats, cattle, sheep, chickens, and other meat sources. Ladies and gentlemen, ecosystems are characterized by what we called biogeochemical cycles. These cycles may be sedimentary in nature, such as phosphorus cycle, or gaseous in nature, such as carbon and nitrogen cycles. Chemical cycling involves three essential things, namely a reservoir, an exchange pool, and a biotic community. That is, chemicals are cycled between organic matter and abiotic reservoirs. In the water cycle, evaporation over the ocean is not compensated for by precipitation. Precipitation over land leads to bodies of fresh water and groundwater like aquifers. At last, all water returns to the oceans. The carbon cycle depends on photosynthesis and respiration. In this cycle, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere constitutes an exchange pool. Both terrestrial and aquatic animals and plants exchange carbon dioxide with the atmosphere. Living and dead organisms serve as reservoirs for the carbon cycle as they have organic carbon. Human activities such as burning of fossil fuels increase the energy level of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases, contributing to global warming. The phosphorus cycle depends on the weathering of rock. In this cycle, geological upheavals move phosphorus from the ocean to land. Slow weathering of rocks return phosphorus to soil. Most phosphorus is recycled within a community, and phosphorus is a limiting nutrient. The nitrogen cycle depends on bacteria. Plants cannot use nitrogen gas from the atmosphere. During nitrogen cycle, various bacteria in soil and root nodules of some plants convert gaseous nitrogen to compounds which plant species can use, such as nitrates and ammonium. The process of conversion of atmospheric nitrogen to nitrogenous compounds such as ammonium and nitrates, which plants can absorb and use is called nitrogen fixation. The process by which organic nitrogen or nitrogen gas is mineralized to ammonium is ammonification. Nitrification is the production of nitrates, while denitrification is the conversion of nitrate back to nitrogen gas, which enters the atmosphere. Certain human activities increase transfer rates in the nitrogen cycle. One process which is of interest to the ecologists is acid deposition. Did you know acid deposition occurs when nitrogen oxides enter the atmosphere, combine with water vapor, and return to Earth in precipitation? A rapid inflow of nutrients degrades aquatic ecosystems. For example, nutrient input from fertilizers and other sources causes rapid eutrophication, leading to decline species diversity and oxygen depletion of lakes, rivers, and coastal water bodies. Ecosystem services are vital to human health and well-being in particular. In other words, while agricultural and other managed non-natural ecosystems, such as the Volta Lake ecosystem, are necessary to supply our needs as human beings, we also depend on services which are provided by the natural ecological system. Yes, agricultural and other managed non-natural ecosystems, such as the Volta Lake ecosystem, are necessary to supply our needs as human beings. Be that as it may, we also depend on services which are provided by the natural ecological systems. To what extent can you summarize today's lecture? Leave your summary as a comment on the YouTube video. Gratitude for enjoying this lecture. You are respectfully invited to subscribe to the DH Media GH. Great.